Every night, in homes across America, millions of men over the age of 60 go through a bedtime routine that they believe is sensible, health-conscious, and appropriate. And one specific element of that routine is directly making their nocturia worse. Not mildly worse, significantly, measurably worse, in a way that has been documented in the urological literature with objective bladder diary data. And the frustrating part is that this mistake is completely invisible. It does not feel like a mistake. It feels like responsible behavior, which is exactly why so few men connect it to their nighttime urination problem and why correcting it produces results that seem disproportionately dramatic relative to the simplicity of the change. I am Dr. James Whitaker, board-certified urologist, and today I am going to tell you exactly what this bedtime mistake is, explain the precise physiological mechanism through which it worsens nocturia, and give you the specific habit adjustment that I give every new patient in my clinic who presents with nighttime urination as a primary complaint. The number one bedtime mistake that makes men over 60 wake up to pee is going to the bathroom to urinate before getting into bed, not because they have a genuine urge to void, but as a precautionary habit. In the urology world, we call this behavior precautionary voiding, or just-in-case voiding, and it is one of the most common and most counterproductive behavioral patterns I encounter in patients with nocturia. The logic behind it seems reasonable. Empty the bladder completely before bed, give yourself the best possible chance of sleeping through without a bathroom trip. But the physiological reality is the opposite of this intuitive logic, and understanding why requires understanding a principle called bladder training and the concept of functional bladder capacity. The bladder is a muscular organ whose capacity is determined not just by its anatomical volume, how much fluid it can physically hold before it is structurally full, but by its functional capacity, the volume at which the detrusor muscle generates the urgency signal that the brain interprets as a need to void. In a well-trained bladder, the functional capacity is close to the anatomical capacity. The urgency signal does not arrive until the bladder is genuinely full, giving you adequate time to reach a toilet at a socially convenient moment. In a poorly trained, overly sensitized bladder, which is what develops in men who void precautionarily, frequently, and at low bladder volumes, the functional capacity shrinks progressively over weeks and months. The detrusor learns to generate urgency signals at lower and lower volumes because it is never allowed to experience filling to adequate volumes. The threshold for the urgency signal drops, and the result is a bladder that genuinely cannot hold the amount of urine it should be able to hold without generating an urgent, awakening-level signal. When a man voids before bed as a precautionary habit, going to the bathroom when his bladder is perhaps at 30 to 40% capacity, he sends his bladder into the night starting from essentially empty. The kidneys continue producing urine throughout the night at whatever rate his nocturnal polyuria, hydration status, and ADH function dictate. If his kidneys produce 300 milliliters of urine in the first 3 hours of sleep, a reasonable production rate for a man with mild nocturnal polyuria, and his functional bladder capacity has been shrunk by years of precautionary voiding to only 200 milliliters, he will wake up with urgency at 200 milliliters. If he had not voided before bed and had gone to sleep with 150 milliliters already in his bladder, he would reach the 200 milliliter urgency threshold even faster. So precautionary voiding does not buy him extra time. It resets the clock at 0, but does not change the rate at which the urgency threshold is reached. And over years, the precautionary voiding behavior reinforces the shrinking of functional bladder capacity through the sensitization mechanism, making each subsequent night progressively worse. A 2010 study published in Neurology and Urodynamics specifically examined the relationship between precautionary voiding behavior and functional bladder capacity in men with nocturia, and found that men who reported voiding before bed as a consistent habit had significantly lower functional bladder capacities, measured by maximum voided volume on bladder diary, compared to men who voided only in response to genuine urgency. The researchers concluded that precautionary voiding behavior was a significant contributing factor to reduced functional capacity, and that bladder retraining, which includes deliberately resisting and delaying the precautionary void, was an important behavioral component of nocturia management. The specific bedtime habit adjustment I recommend is this. For the 2 hours before bed, practice urge deferral. When you feel an urge to urinate, regardless of the time, do not go immediately. Sit still. Contract your pelvic floor firmly, the 10-second technique I described in the previous video. Breathe slowly and deeply. Hold the urge for 5 minutes initially, extending to 10, then 15 minutes as your capacity improves over weeks. When you do eventually void before bed, make sure it is in response to a genuine urge, a bladder that feels genuinely full, not a precautionary void driven by anxiety about nighttime waking. If you do not feel a genuine urge in the hour before bed, do not void. Go to sleep. Your bladder will tell you when it is genuinely ready. Additionally, the timing of your last meaningful fluid intake matters considerably. A moderate intake of fluid, no more than 250 milliliters, approximately 1 cup, in the final 2 hours before bed, provides enough hydration to prevent the irritating concentrated urine that can itself trigger urgency, while limiting the total overnight urine load. Avoid the common pattern of restricting all fluids from 6 p.m., which often drives a large compensatory intake at 9 or 10 p.m. as thirst becomes intolerable, and replace it with a gradual taper. Normal hydration until 5 p.m., half your usual rate from 5 to 7 p.m., and no more than a cup from 7 p.m. until bed. Finally, the final liquid before bed matters enormously. I will address the specific bedtime drinks that worsen nocturia in a dedicated video, but the key principle is to avoid anything diuretic, caffeine in any form, alcohol in any amount, and carbonated beverages, which can irritate the bladder wall directly through carbonic acid contact. Men who implement these behavioral changes consistently, replacing the precautionary bedtime void with genuine urge response voiding, practicing urge deferral in the evening hours, and calibrating their evening fluid intake appropriately, typically see a meaningful reduction in nocturia frequency within 4 to 6 weeks. Not because their prostate changed, not because any medication altered their bladder chemistry, but because their bladder's functional capacity, which had been progressively shrunk by years of a well-intentioned but physiologically counterproductive habit, began to recover through the behavioral retraining process. Share this video with every man in your life who wakes up at night. Leave a comment below telling me whether you void before bed as a habit. Like and subscribe. I will see you in the next video.